Tom, you've been in this arena a long time. Tell us a little bit about your story.
I have. I was thinking last night, I've had people in every war from the Revolution to the present in my family. I've got a nephew who's a Marine sergeant in Afghanistan and a cousin who's an Air Force general. So I have a long military history in my family. My father was an Army officer, and I guess he thought I was a little unusual when I decided to go to Annapolis rather than West Point, which I did. I went to Annapolis, graduated in 1970, and then heard the call of the infantry and decided I'd go in the Marines. Went to Marine infantry training and then decided I really wanted to be a pilot, a fighter pilot, rather than be on the ground and dealing with hand-to-hand combat. And I went to Navy Flight School, became a excuse me, an A4 pilot, which is a single engine, single pilot attack airplane. I was on active duty from 1970 to 1975. I was in 3 Marine squadrons. At that time, I met another lieutenant, and we became partners for 20 years. And while we were on active duty, we really had a difficult time because we essentially had to live a lie for all those years. And I think the critical point was when a good friend of ours who was a Marine major, he had returned from Vietnam after his second tour. He had 2 or 3 Purple Hearts, which you get when you're wounded, the Silver Star, which is the 3rd highest award in the military, was picked up at a gay bar in Oceanside a month before he was to retire. And he just vanished off the face of the earth. He had been discharged, which meant he lost all his benefits, his retirement. So we looked at each other and said, well, that could be us. And at the time we were, what, 27? He was 42. You know, in that many years, that could be us going out the door, and we just can't go on like this. So both of us left the Marine Corps. I went on to fly for Continental Airlines as a pilot. Then we both went to law school and practiced law for a while. And he died in 1992. And when he died, I decided I was going to become engaged in the fight, basically in his honor. I went to Washington with the Campaign for Military Service, and because Strom Thurmond had appointed me to the Naval Academy, how's that for an interesting little...
I'd like to see that certificate up on your wall.
That's right. I've got a photograph of me and Strom Thurmond, and we were both very, very young.
Yeah, he was 70.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. But anyway, so they said, you need to go and meet with Strom Thurmond while I was in D.C. So I went, and he wasn't around, but I met with his military liaison, and the senior liaison was none other than Joe Uli Wilson. And I spent 2 miserable hours arguing with him and telling him that this don't ask, don't tell was never going to work. It was bankrupt from its inception because it went against the core values of all the military services. People had to live a lie, and they didn't get it. So when we ended up with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and Peter's rendition of the facts, I think, are very accurate. The President wanted to allow open service, but Sam Nunn and other members of the Democratic Party were against it. And so we came up with this compromise, which, you know, has been almost as bad as the ban with the number of people that we've lost. And it only counts the 14,000 or so that were thrown out. There are countless people that just left, you know, highly qualified and highly skilled people that said, you know, like me and my partner, we just can't live like this. So I then joined the board of Service Members Legal Defense Network in 1995. Started to work with them. I was the co-chair for 7 years. And I want to correct one thing Peter said. It just wasn't, you know, the litigation. I think there was a huge effort made by Service Members Legal Defense Network, and we're joined with our allies from HRC. And
it always takes organizing to get anything done.
It does. It takes everybody getting together. And one of the beauties of this movement, I think, that we should learn from as a community is we all have to get together and try to work together. And you know that there's a lot of territorial fights that go on and that sort of thing. But somehow we managed to go to Washington and lobby and make this happen. And I really think the real key to our victory was personalizing the cases and having the people stand up and talk about how it affected them. And, you know, it was for many, many years that's what we did. And you saw people like Keith Meinhol and recently Fehrenbach and Mike Almy, and, you know, the list goes on and on and on. These people that got out there and stood up and put a face to what was going on and told stories. And I've suggested that maybe that's been the problem with ENDA, is that you don't hear those kind of stories. You really need to do that in order to get the public attention and make sure that people understand what's going on. Because I think most Americans are very fair-minded, but they just don't get it. They don't think about it. So at SLDN, I was a co-chair for a while, and one of the things I'm most proud of is that we recognized about 5 or 6 years ago, the biggest problem we had in 1993 was with the chaplains. So we created this organization called the Forum on the Military Chaplaincy. Started out with 5, 6, 7 chaplains. Now we're up to 70. And we have been fortunate enough to meet with the actual chiefs of chaplains, advise them. We were asked to go to Washington to meet with the working group when they were doing their report. Spent a lot of time talking to them about this chaplain issue, because we understood that that was going to probably be the same situation when we tried to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. These chaplains would, the evangelical fundamentalists, which have taken over the military, quite frankly. And people don't realize that we got 70 or 80% of the chaplains in the military are fundamentalists, and they're very much opposed to this. So we were fortunate enough to be heard, and I think just today we found out, well, about a month ago, the Navy issued an order saying that they would permit marriages in states where marriage was legal, and that they could do those marriages in on-base chapels. And then they reversed. When these chaplains and members of the Congress who were opposed to repeal started to scream and yell, they backed off and said, we'll think about this later. Well, later was today. The DADT sent out a policy, set forth a policy going back and saying, yes, now we can have marriages in states where they're permitted, and that chaplains can participate off-base and on-base, and they can use base facilities for these marriages where they're permitted. So
that's a big breakthrough.
It's a really big breakthrough. I'm very proud of the work that we did. You know, under the radar, when you work for so long, under the radar, no one even knows you're there. This is kind of one of the many hidden stories that I think will eventually come out about what was done and what groups really participated and made this happen. So it's a joyous time for me.
It's interesting when you said about sort of making ourselves known and telling our stories. I remember when Gene O'Leary and Rob Eichberg kind of invented National Coming Out Day. And the whole notion of it was, people already know you, but they don't know you're gay or lesbian, maybe. And so if you let that be known, then they say, oh, you know, the nurse that took care of me in the hospital, my 3rd grade teacher, or whatever. And it's very much the same with, it doesn't always make people really love and understand us necessarily, but at least it puts a face on it.
It does put a face on it, and you know, that's such an important thing for people to do, is to come out and be known. And I think that's one of the reasons our opponents fought so strongly against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because they knew that this will have a huge societal impact, because people are going to go in the service and they're going to meet gay and lesbian people and bisexual people, and hopefully one day transgender people. And they're going to say, you know, this soldier or this Marine or this airman is doing a hell of a good job. There's, you know, maybe I came from a place where we didn't have many gay people, but now I know them and they're just like the rest of us. And, you know, and that's going to cause a transformation. I think it's going to have the same sort of effect that Truman's Order in 1948 did for African Americans. I mean, when they finally forced African Americans and white soldiers to be together, many of the white soldiers realized that they were just wrong in their view of
many of them did, but they have to keep learning the lesson
over
and over again,
still,
which
you
is
know,
probably
some
what's
of
going
those
to
separate but equal
be the same
people
with
are still
us.
here.
Right, exactly.